If you've been a long-time viewer of this channel, you'll know I typically reserve my shipwreck videos for Sunday. Earlier on, I broke from that mold, but I haven't done that for quite a while, which makes today's video something of an exception to the rule, mostly because I feel this is a topic that I should cover early. After all, the discovery of a car on USS Yorktown's wreck has gotten the shipwreck community buzzing, and even penetrated beyond that point to some extent. Mostly because no one is quite sure what that car was doing there, who the owner was, why it was put there, and why it wasn't pushed overboard to lighten the ship. It's a bit of a mystery. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of veterans around to ask about it these days. So we get an extra Shipwreck Tuesday video. That said, this won't be focusing entirely on that car. I decided to make this a triple feature, looking at Yorktown's car, Hornet's tug, and Nevada's tank, mostly to compare the situations and why each one is different from the others. I also like doing these comparison videos, so there's that. As for the rest of Yorktown's recent survey, I'm currently planning a Yorktown Wreck Part 2 for Sunday. However, that is going to take a bit of work. We're talking probably a good 6 or so hours of wreck footage to dig through. That's why I did Kursk for my last shipwreck video. Either way, let's get into things here. I'll only briefly touch on how each ship ended up on the bottom, because the shipwrecks aren't really the focus here. And for today, we'll be starting with Hornet, which was, prior to the car, the most famous case of a vehicle on a warship wreck. Now, if you'd like more detail on how these ships ended up on the bottom, I'll link my videos. I have videos on the wrecks and their service histories for these three ships. So for today, the simple details will suffice. And for Hornet, this came on October 26, 1942, in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. Hornet would be crippled by Japanese airstrikes despite an effort to tow her to safety. An attempt was made to scuttle the ship, involving several torpedoes and over 400 5-inch shells. This would fail, leaving Hornet afloat when Japanese surface forces arrived. Instead of trying to salvage the ship, they promptly sent the abandoned carrier to the bottom. Around 1:35 a.m. on October 27, 1942. At this point, her wreck would remain undisturbed until January 2019, when the team on RV Petrel located Hornet's wreck at a depth of somewhere between 5,300 meters and 5,500 meters, depending on how you view the depth gauge. That's 17,388 feet and 18,044 feet, respectively. Petrel's survey found Hornet in two pieces. Part of her stern broke off during the sinking, although both parts came to the bottom upright. Aside from the obvious battle damage, the wreck was in remarkably good shape. Much of the paint was intact, and a lot of details are recognizable, from the tow line to her number 8. However, since this video is focused on the tug, I'll link my initial video on the wreck if you are interested on the full look. As for that tug, well, there's a reason I use that as the thumbnail for that video. It was probably the most distinctive image of Hornet's entire wreck survey, for two major reasons. First, the human touch. There's something about seeing this tug tied down and left in place that speaks to you, in a way that seeing her weapons or battle damage doesn't quite match. This was one of the final actions of her crew before she entered battle, and despite all her damage and the sinking itself, that wasn't a wasted effort. Hornet's crew tied this tug down, and it remained in place. You can even see one of the lines here. That's impressive enough on its own. The good fortune of that tug is just as impressive. When you zoom out, you can see one of those shell impacts. Just a little bit higher up, and that 5-inch shell would have gone right through the tug. And yet, despite that, the vehicle is in one piece. This image might show it even better. That shell impact is only a couple feet away. For naval gunfire, that's basically as close as a near miss gets. And yet, it didn't move the tug at all, and it didn't damage it either. Even the manufacturer plaque is still clearly legible. Which brings us to the second reason, the incredible level of preservation. The tug is certainly covered in rust and rusticles, and we can't see the other side to know how bad it looks there. And yet, despite that, the tug still looks very good when you consider it's been down there for 77 years, at least when the wreck was discovered, though I doubt it's changed that much since 2019, if I'm being honest. That preservation has, among other things, led to calls to salvage the tug, bring it up, and put it in a museum, perhaps even try and restore it to running status. Now the question is how possible that is. I'm not the one to say, since I'm no mechanic. I wouldn't be surprised if all the internals are more rust than metal. Nonetheless, the possibility captures the imagination, the same way similar calls to salvage Lexington's aircraft do. A real piece of history that could potentially be brought back to the surface. That said, I'm not aware of any plans in that regard. Lexington's aircraft, yes, but not Hornet's tug. So far as I'm aware, it will remain down there until the wreck or the tug itself eventually rusts away. Which is probably a good point to move on to Yorktown's car. And the reason most of you are watching this video, I'm sure. But again, a brief look at the sinking will have to come first. This saw Yorktown, hastily repaired from her Coral Sea damage, sail for the Battle of Midway. This took place for the most part on June 4th, 1942. 4 Japanese carriers would be sunk over the course of the action, while the worst loss on the American side would be Yorktown. After weathering 2 attacks by Japanese aircraft, the carrier was left a battered wreck. While efforts were made to salvage the ship, these would ultimately fail. A Japanese submarine stalked Yorktown as those were underway. That boat, I-168, would fire a spread of torpedoes at Yorktown. One hit USS Hammond alongside to help the salvage effort. Hammond would sink in short order, with her depth charges going off as she did. Meanwhile, 2 more torpedoes slammed into Yorktown. The combination of those 2 factors would doom the carrier. She ultimately rolled over and capsized on June 7, 1942, sinking down in 3 miles or 5 kilometers of water. Her wreck would remain there alone in the dark until discovered by Robert Ballard, admittedly more famous for his work on Titanic and Bismarck, but he also led an expedition to Midway, where he discovered Yorktown's wreck on May 19, 1998. That wreck was remarkably intact, albeit resting at a severe list. Not much material was released from that survey. On the other hand, a second survey by Nautilus in September of 2023 showed much more detail. That survey was the core of my video on Yorktown's wreck. It won't be for this one, however. Yorktown was surveyed again this month, as of this recording, by NOAA. This makes her the most visited of the American carrier wrecks, and it was also by far the most detailed look, from the bridge to the hull damage and everything in between. For this video, however, the important note is the hangar, where a car, of all things, was located. This was something of a surprise to the survey team. No one expected to find this there. Aircraft, sure, maybe a tug like Hornet, but a staff car was a big surprise. Not least because there's no written material that I'm aware of indicating it would be there. And yet it is there. A rusted out car sitting on Yorktown's hangar deck, where it's touching the bottom, even further over than Hornet, as you can see here. The car itself is in rough shape. In addition to being covered in silt, it hasn't held up well over the decades underwater. Where Hornet's tug was in one piece and completely recognizable, the car isn't. As you can see in this image here, the car's hood is gone, or rather, it fell away. I believe this bit of debris here is that car hood. Regardless, this exposes the engine. You can see a little bit of it towards the front of the car here, but most of it is either covered in debris or silt. As we saw in the previous image, Yorktown's hangar is right on the bottom. That allowed a lot more mud in than on Hornet, and probably contributed a bit to the poor condition of the car, comparatively speaking. The windshield is intact, but only a bit further back, the roof is gone. If the car is the type that NOAA believes it is, a 1941 Super Woody, this is not surprising. The top, as you can see here, wasn't exactly tough metal. It would also explain the condition of the side paneling. While not in focus here, a zoom in shows that much of that is also missing. If this was a Woody that was, well, made of wood, it should be no surprise that rotted away. We also get a better look at the engine, although again, it's hard to see much, and what is there has deteriorated a fair bit. Looking at the car from behind, that deterioration does not get much better. The back windshield is still there, but the roof is completely gone. This has exposed the interior, such as it is. Much of that is rotted away or buried by the silt, although you can see the steering wheel beneath some of the rotted roof. That said, the most recognizable bit is definitely the spare tire, still fixed in place on the back, with a little peak of the chrome bumper beside it. A closer zoom in shows the fender as well here. Beyond the fender, there's just one more detail I want to touch on, and that's a tag covered up and barely legible, but intact enough to make out staff service. This car was, at some point, a staff car of some form. That's not surprising considering the design, but the confirmation is nice. However, what this doesn't confirm is why the car was there. NOAA put out an open call for anyone who could figure that out. Unfortunately, short of a deep dive into the National Archives, I'm not certain that's possible. No source I've ever read on Yorktown even slightly mentions the car. And as I noted before, there aren't many veterans left around. Even so, there's two prevailing theories. The first one, that this car was picked up for repair after Coral Sea, and promptly forgotten. The rush to get Yorktown ready for Midway left no time to get this thing removed, and it just stuck around until the sinking. I find this one a bit less likely than the alternative, that it was Admiral Fletcher's personal staff car. If this was Fletcher's car, I can sort of understand why it wasn't tossed overboard. Yorktown's crew was going so far as removing 5-inch guns to fight the carrier's list. A car would have been an easy way to lessen weight if it were some random car taken on at Coral Sea. Now, if it were the Admiral's personal car, on the other hand, well, I can more easily imagine the reaction. Do you want to be the one who tells the Admiral we tossed his car overboard? Presuming Yorktown survived, of course. Either way, that rounds off the car for the moment. I'm keeping an eye on things to see if any new details come up. If so, I'll put that in Sunday's video. For now, we'll round things off with Nevada's tank. This is, perhaps, the least surprising of the three. When Nevada was subjected to Operation Crossroads atomic testing, she had tanks on her deck. This was done to test the effect of the bombs on armored vehicles. When the battleship didn't sink, those tanks were left aboard, too radioactive to bother salvaging. They would, in fact, still be on board when the battleship was sunk in later weapons testing. That came on July 31st, 1948. Nevada rolled over and capsized. Yet, despite that, the tanks remained nearby. When the wreck was located on May 11th, 2020, one of the M26 Pershings was found, upside down with one of the tracks broken off, but otherwise pretty intact. It clearly hit the bottom hard from the crater. Despite this, the tank is in one piece, at least for the hull. It's not quite as striking an image as the tug-on Hornet or Yorktown's mystery car. But, well, I thought it was still worth including here at the end. Aircraft are one thing. These three vehicles, however, they're quite interesting to see on or near their respective wrecks. Not the kind of thing you see often, to say the least. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.